Chapter 25 of Alice Adams. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeanie. Alice Adams by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 25. One morning that autumn, Mrs. Adams came into Alice's room and found her completing a sober toilet for the street. Moreover, the expression revealed in her mirror was harmonious with the businesslike severity of her attire. "What makes you look so cross, dearie?" the mother asked. "Couldn't you find anything nicer to wear than that plain old dark dress?" "I don't believe I'm cross," the girl said, absently. "I believe I'm just thinking. Isn't it about time?" "Time for what?" "Time for thinking. For me, I mean." Disregarding this, Mrs. Adams looked her over thoughtfully. "I can't see why you don't wear more colour," she said. "At your age it's becoming, and proper, too. Anyhow, when you're going on the street I think you ought to look as gay and lively as you can manage. You want to show 'em you've got some spunk." "How do you mean, Mama?" "I mean about Walter's running away and the mess your father made of his business. It would help to show 'em you're holding up your head just the same." "Show whom?" "All those other girls that—" "Not I," Alice laughed shortly, shaking her head. "I've quit dressing at them, and if they saw me they wouldn't think what you want 'em to. It's funny, but we don't often make people think what we want 'em to, Mama. You do thus and so, and you tell yourself, now, seeing me do thus and so, people will naturally think this and that. But they don't. They think something else, usually just what you don't want 'em to. I suppose about the only good in pretending is the fun we get out of fooling ourselves that we fool anybody." "Well, but you wouldn't be pretending. You ought to let people see you're holding your head up because you are. You wouldn't want that Mildred Palmer to think you're cast down about— well, you know you wouldn't want her not to think you're holding your head up, would you?" "She wouldn't know whether I am or not, Mama." Alice bit her lip, then smiled faintly as she said, "Anyhow, I'm not thinking about my head in that way. Not this morning, I'm not." Mrs. Adams dropped the subject casually. "Are you going downtown?" she inquired. "Yes." "What for?" "Just something I want to see about. I'll tell you when I come back. Anything you want me to do?" "No, I guess not today. I thought you might look for a rug, but I'd rather go with you to select it. We'll have to get a new rug for your father's room, I expect." "I'm glad you think so, Mama. I don't suppose he's ever really noticed it, but that old rug of his, well, really—" "I didn't mean for him," her mother explained thoughtfully. "No, he don't mind it, and he'd likely make a fuss if we changed it on his account. No, what I meant, we'll have to put your father in Walter's room. He won't mind, I don't expect. Not much." "No, I suppose not," Alice agreed, rather sadly. "I heard the bell a while ago. Was it somebody about that?" "Yes, just before I came upstairs. Mrs. Lohr gave him a note to me, and he was really a very pleasant-looking young man. A very pleasant-looking young man." Mrs. Adams repeated that with increased animation and a thoughtful glance at her daughter. "He's a Mr. Will Dickson. He has a first-rate position with the gas works, Mr. Lohr says, and he's fully able to afford a nice room. So if you and I double up in here, then with that young married couple in my room and this Mr. Dickson in your father's, we'll just about have things settled. I thought maybe I could make one more place at table, too, so that with the other people from outside we'd be serving 11 altogether. You see, if I have to pay this cook $12 a week it can't be helped, I guess well, one more would certainly help toward a profit. Of course it's a terribly worrying thing to see how we will come out. Don't you suppose we could squeeze in one more? I suppose it could be managed, yes." Mrs. Adams brightened. "I'm sure it'll be pleasant having that young married couple in the house, and especially this Mr. Will Dickson. He seemed very much of a gentleman, and anxious to get settled in good surroundings. I was very favourably impressed with him in every way, and he explained to me about his name. It seems it isn't William, it's just Will. His parents had him christened that way. It's curious." She paused, and then, with an effort to seem casual, which veiled nothing from her daughter, "It's quite curious," she said again. "But it's rather attractive and different, don't you think?" "Poor Mama!" Alice laughed compassionately. "Poor Mama!" "He is, though," Mrs. Adams maintained. "He's very much of a gentleman, unless I'm no judge of appearances, and it'd really be nice to have him in the house." "No doubt," Alice said, as she opened her door to depart. "I don't suppose we'll mind having any of them as much as we thought we would. Good-bye." But her mother detained her, catching her by the arm. "Alice, you do hate it, don't you?" "No," the girl said quickly. "There wasn't anything else to do." Mrs. Adams became emotional at once; her face cried tragedy and her voice misfortune. "There might have been something else to do. Oh, Alice, you gave your father bad advice when you upheld him in taking a miserable little $9,350 from that old wretch. If your father had just had the gumption to hold out, they'd have had to pay him anything he asked. If he had just had the gumption and a little manly courage—" "Hush!" Alice whispered, for her mother's voice grew louder. "Hush! He'll hear you, Mama." "Could he hear me too often?" the embittered lady asked. "If he'd listened to me at the right time, would we have to be taking in boarders and sinking down in the scale at the end of our lives, instead of going up? You were both wrong. We didn't need to be so panicky. That was just what the old man wanted, to scare us and buy us out for nothing. If your father had just listened to me then, or if for once in his life he'd been half a man—" Alice put her hand over her mother's mouth. "You mustn't! He will hear you." But from the other side of Adams's closed door his voice came querulously. "Oh, I hear her, all right." "You see, Mama?" Alice said. And after Mrs. Adams turned away, weeping, the daughter sighed, then went in to speak to her father. He was in his old chair by the table, with a pillow behind his head, but the crocheted scarf and Mrs. Adams's wrapper swathed him no more. He wore a dressing gown his wife had bought for him, and was smoking his pipe. "The old story, is it?" he said, as Alice came in. "The same old story. Well, well. Has she gone?" "Yes, Papa." "Got your hat on," he said. "Where are you going?" "I'm going downtown on an errand of my own. Is there anything you want, Papa?" "Yes, there is." He smiled at her. "I wish you'd sit down a while and talk to me. Unless your errand—" "No," she said, taking a chair near him. "I was just going down to see about some arrangements I was making for myself. There's no hurry." "What arrangements for yourself, dearie?" "I'll tell you afterwards, after I find out something about them myself." "All right," he said, indulgently. "Keep your secrets. Keep your secrets." He paused, drew musingly upon his pipe, and shook his head. "Funny, the way your mother looks at things. For the matter of that, everything's pretty funny, I expect, if you stop to think about it. For instance, let her say all she likes, but we were pushed right spang to the wall if J. A. Lamb hadn't taken into his head to make that offer for the Works. And there's one of the things I've been thinking about lately, Alice. Thinking about how funny they work out." "Well, what did you think about it, Papa?" "I've seen it happen in other people's lives, time and time again, and now it's happened in ours. You think you're going to be pushed right up against the wall. You can't see any way out, or any hope at all. You think you're gone. And then something you never counted on turns up, and while maybe you never do get back to where you used to be, yet somehow you kind of squirm out of being right spang against the wall. You keep on going. Maybe you can't go much, but you go a little. See what I mean?" "Yes, I understand, dear." "Yes, I'm afraid you do," he said. "Too bad. You oughtn't to understand it at your age. It seems to me a good deal as if the Lord really meant for the young people to have the good times, and for the old to have the troubles. And when anybody as young as you has troubles, there's a big mistake somewhere." "Oh, no," she protested. But he persisted whimsically in this view of divine error. "Yes, it does look a good deal that way. But of course we can't tell. We're never certain about anything. Not about anything at all. Sometimes I look at it another way, though. Sometimes it looks to me as if a body's troubles came on him mainly because he hadn't had sense enough to know how not to have any. As if his troubles were kind of like a boy's getting kept in after school by the teacher to give him discipline or something or other. But my, we don't learn easy." He chuckled mournfully. "Not to learn how to live till we're about ready to die. It certainly seems to me dang tough." "Then I wouldn't brood on such a notion, Papa," she said. "Brood? No," he returned. "I just kind of mull it over." He chuckled again, sighed, and then, not looking at her, he said, "That Mr. Russell, your mother tells me he hasn't been here again not since—" "No," she said quietly, as Adams paused. "He never came again." "Well, but maybe—" "No," she said. "There isn't any maybe. I told him good-bye that night, Papa. It was before he knew about Walter. I told you." "Well," Adams said, "young people are entitled to their own privacy. I don't want to pry." He emptied his pipe into a chipped saucer on the table beside him, laid his pipe aside, and reverted to a former topic. "Speaking of dying—" "Well, but we weren't," Alice protested. "Yes, about not knowing how to live till you're through living, and then maybe not," he said, chuckling at his own determined pessimism. "I see I'm pretty old because I talk this way. I remember my grandmother saying things a good deal like all what I'm saying now. I used to hear her at it when I was a young fella. She was a right gloomy old lady, I remember. Well, anyhow, it reminds me. I want to get on my feet again as soon as I can. I got to look around and find something to go into." Alice shook her head gently. "But, Papa, he told you—" "Never mind throwing that danged doctor up at me," Adams interrupted, peevishly. "He said I'd be good for some kind of light job, if I could find just the right thing. Where there wouldn't be any kind of physical or mental strain, he said. Well, I got to find something like that. Anyway, I'll feel better if I can just get out looking for it." "But, Papa, I'm afraid you won't find it, and you'll be disappointed." "Well, I want to hunt around and see, anyhow." Alice patted his hand. "You must just be contented, Papa. Everything's going to be all right, and you mustn't get to worrying about